My name is Tamila Varshalomidze. I was born as citizen of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. People think that when the hammer and sickle flag came down on the Kremlin in December 1991, the world changed. But things are never that simple. I was too young to remember Soviet rule, but I have lived my whole life in its shadow. As a Georgian, I cannot forget the fact that my family members were executed in the Soviet purges. As a daughter, I cannot forgive the fact that the Soviet system crushed my parents' aspirations. As a reporter, I witnessed the wars and revolutions that are its legacy. In my own country, I saw Russian tanks reasserting Soviet borders and annexing Georgian land. After almost 30 years of independence, the USSR is still with us. And I believe we cannot have a future until we have dealt with this past. I've lived away from Georgia for almost 10 years. Every time I come back, I remember why I left, because I feel that the history is weighing down on my country. And it will take many years to transform it into the country that I want to live in. The area my parents live in is dominated by Soviet blocks. It's pretty gray. Soviet buildings were not designed to make people feel at ease. When the USSR collapsed, there was nobody to look after the stairwells and entrances and exterior of the building. So it's still in their original state. Unfortunately, when we open the door, we still step into a Soviet world. Mama! Mommy! Babulika. My mom remembers the Soviet Union in a very positive way. She was an engineer. She was empowered. Once we got the independence, all the Soviet factories just closed down. There were no jobs for even men, let alone women, so women had to just stay home and become housewives. We have some meat, chicken and beef is dominant in Georgian cuisine. Oh, and this is some dessert. My mom makes it every time I come. We nicked it, I guess Soviets nicked it from the French, so it's our version of millefeuille. We call it Napoleon. My father is very critical of the Soviet era. When he graduated, he ended up working for the mayor's office and he was in charge of the sewage system. My mom, she even now teases him that, oh, you were in charge of our sewage. In Georgia, big occasions are always marked by a family feast and giving toasts.
Tamu. Ვინ შენ აქ გელოდება, ვისაც შენ თავი ყველას გაუმარჯოს. წასული ხარ, რაც არ უნდა იყოს.
გაუმარჯოს.
თქვენ რო იზრდებოდეთ, რა განცდა გქონდათ, რომ სახელმწიფო, თქვენი იყო, რომ ქართველები თავისი ბედის გადამწყვეტები იყვნენ?
ის რო გენახავ, თქვათ, აი, ადრე როგორი ჩაკეტილი ცხოვრება იყო, ალბათ გული დაგწყდება, რომ ჩემი მშობლები ცხოვრობდნენ აი ამ ქვეყანაში, სადაც ხო ესე იყო ჩაკეტილი ყველაფერი. ეხლა როგორ ვხვდებოდით ფაქტიურად რა, რომ იქ უკეთესი იყო, მაგრამ მაინც დარწმუნებულები არ ვიყავით.
და რომ დამთავრდა ეს გარდა სტეხის პერიოდი, გარდამავალი პერიოდი და ისტორია შეიცვალა სკოლაში, მე მივხვდით, რომ რამხელადღვილში ვიყავით.
დადებითი ის იყო, რომ ყველა დასაქმებული იყო. დადებითიც ჰქონდა რაღაცა, ხო?
არა, დასაქმებული კი იყო, მაგრამ რადონის ხელფასი იყო ადამიანები მუშაობდნენ 80 მანეთზე, მაგრამ ეს 80 მანეთი ფაქტიურად შიერი არ მომკვდარიყო ერთ ადამიანზე საუბარი.
და შენ როგორ გონია უკეთეს ცხოვრება გექნებოდა ახლა რომ საბჭოთა კავშირი იყო?
ჩემთვის კი.
არა, ეს როგორ იყო, იცი ეს როგორ იყო? ეს ამან იმუშავა დაახლოებით 6-7 წელი მუშად, რომ კომუნისტური პარტიის რიგებში მიეღოთ.
და მაგრამ
არა, ეს იყო მარტო იმიტომ, რომ მე ძალიან დიდი გულშემატკივარი ვიყავი პარტიის. თუ არ იქნებოდი პარტიული, ვერ გახდებოდი თანამდებობის პირი. მაშინ დასაქმებული ვიყავი და პერსპექტივა მქონდა, რომ ვიქნებოდი სამქროს უფროსი რაღაცა, ამიტომ ჩემთვის პირადად, მაგრამ არა ჩემი შვილებისთვის. ჩემი შვილებისთვის ეს ჯობია.
და როგორ ვიგო საბჭოთა იდეოლოგია და საბჭოთა სტრუქტურა რამდენად შეესაბამება ქართულ ხასიათს, ქართულ ადათ-წესებს და კულტურას.
არანაირად, ფაქტიურად ვცდილობდნენ, რომ ძალაუნებურად დროთა განმავლობაში დათრგუნულიყო ქართული ტრადიციაც და კულტურაც, ენაც პატარა სახელმწიფოებს და ამაზე დიდი წინააღმდეგობა შეხვდნენ და ვერ გაიტანენ თავისი. უსისხლოდ დამთავრდა ეს აქცია მაშინ, მაგრამ აი 99-ში დიდი სისხლის ფასად დაჯდა.
დირექტ ისე გადადიხარ ხოლმე ზემოთა მხრიდან?
ისე პირდაპირ გავდივარ ტუნელში.
My grandfather was born in the 20s, so he's now 90.
Okay.
იქ ხომ მივალთ, სადაც ვარჯიშობენ?
When I grill him about the Soviet Union, it mystifies me that he doesn't feel bitter about the things it did to his family. He was only 9 years old when the secret police came to their home, but in 80 years, the memory has not dimmed.
და მამაშენს თუ მოუყოლია იმის თაობაზე როგორ მამა დაკარგა და რაღაც ეგეთები?
მამა მე მახსოვს როგორ დაკარგა. ჩვენი ერთად დაადგენ თავზე წაიყვანა. შოღა მიყან დაურეკა სკარებზე და აბა შეიცვიო. ის წაიყვანესა და იკარგა ციხეში. ანაკმარი რა დანაშაული გასა. ეგაც პირში მიდიკებაო. რომ ჩემ პურმარიზე იყო გაზდელი. ორი სიტყვა ყოფნიდა მაშინ.
და მე არავინ არ შეგატყობინათ რა მოუვიდა ამ ბაბუა შენს საწაიყვანეს?
თბილისში რო გამოგზავნეს ვიცოდით აქ საზამთროს ტანსაცმელი ჩამოუტანა ბიძაჩემმა. ასე დედაჩემის მამა სანერგის გამგეიყო და 95,000-10,000 წირში 90 ძირი ნერგი გახმა და ხელოვნურად გაახმო აგრანომმა. და მაგაზე დაიჭირეს და წაიყვანა.
რამე შეჯახებასავით თუ გქონია საბჭოთა სისტემასთან? რამე რა ხო არ უთქვა იმას, აი რამ ეს რამდენს ლაპარაკობდა რაღაც?
ვინ კაბედავდა, არა. პირიქით ვაღმერთებდით. სახშიც როგორ ვეთქვა რამე, ესე იგი მაჩემ გეუბნა რომ ვინმე არ გვესმენდეს. სტალინის ისეთი შიში ჰქონდა. ახლა რა თქმა უნდა დამახინჯებები არის აქ, რომ თვითონ პარლამენტი ჩამს და ხელფასებს იზიდებენ და იმაშოვი. მაგრამ წყობა შიში არ გაქვს მაინც.
I was surprised how detailed their memory of the past is. It struck me that my dad was still upset with the way they had to live, and my mom seems to have modified her views because the more time passes, the more I guess she realizes that she lived in an illusion. I feel sad that they had to endure the difficult times in the 90s here, when it was, I would be scared if
If I had to bring up children in the times of change, when your country has to be built again after 200 years of occupation, first by the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union.
In 1989, this was the parliament building, and people gathered here in their thousands to protest for weeks against the rule of Moscow.
The Georgian police was overseeing the protests, but actually it was the Russian special forces who cracked down on them on April 9 in the middle of the night and killed 20 people. Mostly women. They just chased them down in alleyways, and some people, like in the stairwells where they were hiding, were just battered and killed. I was not even 2 years old when April 9 events happened. My parents and my relatives, they describe it as the biggest atrocity committed by the Soviet Union in their lifetime. We still remember it, and it still defines how we view Soviet Union and now Russia.
Exactly 7 months later, the Berlin Wall fell. This is what the world remembers. Not our protesters who were killed anonymously and deliberately under the cover of darkness.
Please, 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 please. This is my room, my working place.
Yuri Mechitov is a photographer who covered the build-up to the 9th of April.
My past is collected in negatives, and not only in files, I mean digital ones, but real negatives with everything.
Yuri was not present when the Soviet army attacked, but he took a picture in the days that followed that has become a symbol of our resistance to the Soviet Union.
It was shot from car top, you know.
What about the protesters? Did they realize what they were doing?
The protesters were from 13 through 25 mainly. Only youngsters, but I mean the 90% never understand. They only gathered because there were some kind of show and they were participants of the show. It was a criminal act for people who organized everything to have the result like this. It was a plan to seize the power.
So would you say that this woman was not a courageous woman, but a stupid woman who didn't know?
No, I never say she's stupid. She's young, but with good intentions, paved the road to the hell sometimes. And you know this, it happened.
Doesn't Moscow owe us an apology for sending in special forces?
Nobody wanted to kill somebody, you know. They all died in Stampedo. 20 ladies died, but due to the asphyxia. No one was ever hit, but they were wounded, but there were no killings.
But would you want to live now in the Soviet Union?
But what do you have against Soviet Union? I don't know.
It's hard to imagine Soviet Union as a place where a person would be happy.
Oh my God, people were so happy. I remember with my own eyes. You are brainwashed. Many things were really right.
But the countries that went towards Western values developed better. The countries that stuck to the ideology of Russia and Soviet Union.
What's wrong with Russia? We have 200 years under Russia, and we were prosperous nation.
200 years of unhappiness.
Oh my God, that's your point of view. Please keep this point of view with you. And you asking me and ask otherwise. I'm asking otherwise because it's a wrong idea. It was history of our country, our beloved country, Georgia. So if you want to expel these pages of history from your mind or from your history, that means you are doing a very wrong thing, you know. Because if you are expelling your past, if you demolish your past, you will never have a future.
felt angry because Moscow had an opportunity to end these protests peacefully. I feel very patriotic, and I think that it was unfair that Russia was making decisions for us, and he doesn't recognize that Russia owes us an apology. I think that Russia owes us an apology for sending in troops to crack down on people who did nothing wrong. Nothing wrong.
Yuri and my parents lived through turbulent times following the end of Soviet rule. Georgia today is far from perfect, but it has come a long way since 1989, and it seems inconceivable that people could still miss such a repressed and repressive past. In theory, this occupation ended 30 years ago. In practice, the occupation continues.
I've never been here before. Somehow nobody ever mentions this building, and every time I traveled outside the city, I see it and I always wonder what it is.
We try to shut our minds to the existence of the Soviet monuments and buildings, but the reality is they still dominate our lives, as they were meant to. They squat on the hillsides of our towns and cities as if awaiting the return of their Soviet masters. They give you the eerie impression that our world is the temporary one and it is the Soviet one that is permanent. But most of all, it's the blocks, row after row, street after street. Perhaps it seems strange if you have never lived in one, but it is these blocks that have left the deepest scar on me.
This block is quite elaborate.
Irakli Zvania is an expert on Soviet architecture. He has publicly supported the preservation of these buildings.
Oh, it's quite spacious.
Yeah, this is the big one. This elevator is not for the residents of this building.
And it needs coins. What's the deal with these coin-operated elevators?
It was installed already in the 90s.
When the USSR collapsed?
Yes, so there was no one to run to manage the building. We're on the bridge. So
I grew up in one of the buildings that was built in the 70s during the Soviet Union. Am I wrong that I'm dreaming about the time when these buildings will be demolished? Is it fair to say, let's just erase this painful history?
you know, I don't think it's right and I don't think it's possible. First of all, buildings, they are just buildings, you know. Even the buildings which keep the memory of tragedy are monuments, like concentration camps in Germany are kept in order to be reminded, you know, about the history.
The government buildings and the monuments, they seem to inspire awe. Did they want to just scare people, or what did they want to achieve?
Well, yeah, of course. One of the means to show the power of the state has always been architecture. It was always the mean to show your own people that they are small, they are little, and they should be afraid of the state, to tell your people that we are great.
In Georgia, our monolithic architecture is not the only permanent reminder of the Soviet Union. The man who ruled in Moscow from 1924 to 1953, was not a Russian, but Georgia's most famous son, Joseph Stalin. Gori is Stalin's hometown. It still celebrates his birthday, and at its heart, it hosts Georgia's official Stalin Museum. Outside the museum, his parents' home has been preserved so we can see his humble beginnings. When you enter, you face Stalin, and it makes you look up and admire him. It's designed that way. It makes you feel like he's great and he must be respected.
საინტერესო პიროვნება. თავისი ეპოქის ერთ-ერთი ყველაზე საინტერესო პიროვნება.
მაგრამ ცუდებით რო გაკეთებული აქვს, საინტერესო
მაინც საინტერესოა, მე რა. ალექსანდრე მაკედონელს არა აქვს ცუდები გაკეთებული? არ არის საინტერესო?
უფრო მეტად ჰიტლერს ადარებენ და ამიტომ ამბობ.
ხო, ადარებენ. ადარებენ ჰიტლერს, იმიტომ რომ ფიქრობენ, რომ საკონცერტო, მაგრამ შეიძლება მაინც მოქმედებს ის, რომ მე აქ ვარ დღეს და ჩემი გადასახედიდან, მაგრამ მე მგონია, იმიტომ რომ აი ის საკონცენტრაციო ბანაკები ეს სხვა არ არის მოგონილი არა. ალბათ აქაც იყო ამ საკონცენტრაციო საშინელება იყო ის, მაგრამ ну, რა ვიცი, ხა მაინც ვერ არის.
აი, თუ შეიძლება რომ ეს მუზეუმი აღიქვას ვინმემ, როგორც განდიდებისთვის შექმნილი.
არა. არანაირ განდიდებას ჩვენ ახლა არ ვიმსახურებით. ჩვენ უბრალოდ აი ფაქტებს კონსტატირუємо ფაქტი.
მაგრამ გვეამაყებოდეს უნდა?
რატო უნდა გიამაყებო? როგორ შეიძლება გიამაყებოდეს? აი რაღაც აი ხა აქ არის ის სურათები გაჩვენებთ. ხო? აი ეს ხალხი, რომელიც საუკეთესო ნაწილი არის და არა მარტო საქართველოში, რომელიც დაიღუპა, მაგრამ ფაქტია და ისტორიაა. ის აბა ჩვენი ხა ყველაფერი შლიშენი ცხოვრებიდან რაც უარყოფითი იყო? ის იყო შენ ცხოვრებაში და სად მიდიხარ მე?
Even if its curator says it's not trying to do so, the museum still seems to be glorifying Stalin. It's 99% about the greatness of Stalin, and somewhere hidden is the 1% about how cruel he was and how many people he killed. They make you circle around his death mask, the same we do at funerals. They make you mourn him. They make you take part in his death ritual. Even this room, like, you come in and you feel that his presence, like he is still here, he's dead and we should be sorry for it. I cannot help but feel how deeply scarred we are by our past. We live in a country dominated by Soviet monuments and icons, but we still try to ignore what really happened here. Unfortunately, escaping your past is not that easy. If you look down on Tbilisi, you will see a European capital. Ancient city walls and Orthodox churches mingling with the glass and steel structures of a modern state. Mother Georgia looking out over her people, a sword for her enemies, a cup of wine for her friends. The reality is very different. Georgia had the misfortune to sit at the axis of empires, and we were seldom strong enough to resist our powerful neighbors. For the last 200 years, these invaders have come from the north. First the Russian Empire, and then the Soviet one. Behind these once grand facades, the Soviet terror apparatus known as the Cheka began. Few Georgians want to engage with this history, and it is slowly being erased by indifference and decay. Sovlab is an organization that is trying to preserve these sites, or at least document them before they disappear.
We are now in the Cheka house. It's the main door. And from here, the route of the prisoners were starting. And there was the interrogation, and also there was a space under this first floor, completely dark and wet underground, which was place for the torture. The bloodiest time was 1924. In August, the anti-Soviet uprising started, and Soviet authorities shot the political prisoners as a revenge. In all of Georgia, some approximately 4,000 persons was killed during this 1 week, 28th of August, 3 of September in 1924. So, we are now in the basement of the Cheka house. It's the former prison cells. It was a place for the enormous torture, sometimes killing of those people.
And people would be like supervised from this hall,
of course.
Right?
Yes, yes. It's a standard prison door. We think it's the original one. When we first time entered this room, this wall was clean. And on the wall, you can find the inscription of the prisoners who were sitting here in 1920s and 1930s.
Yeah, and do people actually know now what the story of this building?
Generally, our society absolutely doesn't care about this kind of the memory.
I think we actively avoid dealing with our past. This has always been the mindset of my parents' generation. They were born into a Soviet Union which was against people asking questions, and curiosity got you into trouble. Even though the USSR collapsed, their mindset hasn't changed. In 2004, the Ministry of the Interior opened the Cheka and KGB files to the public. But neither my parents nor my grandfather have come here to find out what happened to his grandfather in 1937. Like so many Georgians, their anxiety is that someone they knew, perhaps even a family member, might have been involved.
ხო, მე საინტერესო იქნებოდა რომ გვენახა, მაგრამ ალბათ ეს არავინ არ შემოინახავდა, ეხლა ვინ ჩაუშვა და რაღაცა.
არა, ეგეთი რა ხო, იქ საქმეში იქნებოდა, ვისი ჩვენებით ხდება ეს ყველა.
The documents are all in Russian.
ეს უკვე სხვა პიროვნებებზე არის
ეს იგივე ადამიანები მოკლეს მომ. Oh, everyone in this file died on the same day. We just found a document. So my father's great-grandfather, Varshalomidze, Yusuf, Hussein's son, was sentenced on the 26th of October 1937, and he was executed on the 29th. Out of 70-something people, he was executed as number 31. He was executed in Batumi, but my grandfather thought that he was actually taken to Tbilisi for execution, so they have no idea what happened. But it doesn't say why he was killed. What did he do to deserve a death? Well, now we are going to have a bigger document that says, that has all the details about his case.
ეხლა ეს არის მასადამე ყველაზე ძირითადი დოკუმენტი, ეს არის თვითონ სამეულის ხტომის ოქმია, რომელიც შედგა 15 ოქტომბერს 1937 წლისა.
He was accused of plotting some protests and actions against the government.
როგორც ხედავთ, აი განაჩენი არის დახურება პირადი ქონების კონფისკაციით. აი ხედავთ, აი ამ პროტოკოლებში ძალიან ხშირად მითითებულია ვისი ჩვენების საფუძველზე ხდებოდა დასმენა, მაგრამ აქ არ არის აქ ითქობა, ეთქობა გამოკვეთილი იყო, ამას დასმენა არ სჭირდებოდა, ეხლა ნუ ქონელი ახლა
ქონების ჩამორთმევის
მაგრამ ანუ რეპრესიებში ყვებოდა ის კატეგორიები, ვისაც კი რამე ქონება ქონდა, ანუ ეს
In this year, 1937, 10,000 people were executed by the Soviet Interior Ministry. So they were very busy killing people. That's why they called this period a Great Terror, period of Great Terror. It has been 80 years since my grandfather's grandfather was killed, but I think that finding the truth still matters. I feel it helps us to understand why and how we were controlled as a country. ძალიან აღერმებული იყავი დოკუმენტების რო გითხარი მოვიტანე.
ხელავე ხდა იმისა რომ ახლობელი არ იყოს ვინმე.
ჩამშვები. ესე იგი ორი საბუთი ამოვიღეთ არქივიდან. ეს თბილისის არქივში ამოვიღეთ. თბილისში არ გადმოუყვანიათ, ბათუმში მოკლეს. ბათუმში.
ახალვა ჩავში. ჭოროხთა.
მაგრამ თავარი ის არის რომ ინფორმანტი არ იყო. არავის არ ჩაუშვია. ეს ყველას დაველაპარაკე, ვისაც დაველაპარაკე, ამბობდნენ რომ ესო კულაკი რო იყო, ყოფილი კულაკი, ამასო ჩაშვება არ ჭირდებოდა. ყველა მიცოდაო და არ ნიშნავს ის რომ ეს ამოიღეს ან რაღაცა არ იყო ინფორმანტი. ამიტომ ყველა ნერვიულობდეთ.
ჩამშვები
არა. აბრალებენ რომ გადატრიალებას ცდილობდაო, მაგრამ ეს
მოტივაცია იყო, ეს მოტივაცია რომ ის გამოც თავს ერთხო. პარტიაზე ვარ გაბრაზებული. კომუნისტურ პარტიაზე. ფაქტიურად უდანაშაულო ადამიანები დახვრიტეს. ესაა ძალიან ცუდი.
განუკითხაობა იყო.
საბჭოთა კავშირს რომ აქებენ, სულ მაგ მახსენდება, რომ დაფუძნებულია ტყუილზე, კრიმინალზე და როგორ შეიძლება ასეთ საფუძველზე დაფუძნებული სახელმწიფო წყობა ყოფილიყო წესიერი. I feel a weight has been lifted for my family. We have taken back our memory from the Soviets, but there are parts of the Soviet legacy that I fear will never be within our control. In August 2008, I was traveling from Tbilisi when all of a sudden cars came to standstill. When we started to see Georgian military rushing in the same direction as us, I was like, what could be happening? Like, it was so scary. We turned on the radio and found out that war broke out on the border with Russia. Russian tanks were rolling from South Ossetia breakaway region to Tbilisi. They were on the edge of invading the capital of Georgia. It was unbelievable. Russia claimed to be supporting South Ossetian independence, but it coincided with Georgia holding a vote on joining NATO, a clear challenge to Russian power. This is one of the villages that is the closest to the divide between South Ossetia and Georgia proper. I feel that I have to be very cautious because I've heard of many stories of people being picked up by the Russian military just because they got too close to the barbed wires. I, just like all the other Georgians, think that South Ossetia is part of our country, so it's a little strange being kept out from your own territory. South Ossetians still cross into Georgia, but very few Georgians go the other way, at least voluntarily.
გამარჯობა და თქვენზე გითხრას რომ თუ დაელაპარაკებითო ცოტა ახლოს მიგიყვანს უსაფრთხოთო და
თქვენი სახელი გვარი?
Tamila Varshalomidze. So he said that he needs the approval of his boss to let us through for security reasons, and a car is going to escort us to and from so that we're safe. The feeling that you get is a mix of anger and fear that you're approaching a hostile place, but it's actually your own country. There they are, the barbed wires. I was only allowed a couple of minutes at the border. Any presence here soon draws attention. 2 weeks after the war, Russia recognized South Ossetian independence. 20% of our land was occupied, annexed by Russia. Barbed wire started appearing in villages that border the breakaway regions. The village is split in two. The residents of that house and this house might be related. If a person dies on the other side, these residents have to spend weeks to get permits and go over there. So it makes people's lives very difficult. Control by the Soviet Union or control by Russia are, for me, indistinguishable. The orders still come from Moscow. In Georgia, we may have freed ourselves from Soviet rule, but we seem incapable of freeing ourselves from the Soviet mindset. Perhaps this is because the Soviets infiltrated our Georgian identity so completely. This memorial, the Chronicle of Georgia, just outside Tbilisi, depicts heroic moments from our long history. Emotionally, as a Georgian, I am still caught up in the power of its imagery. But it is a monument sanctioned by the Soviet state. It was built to make us believe we were free, when we were not. Sometimes you have to look elsewhere for answers to your own problems. There is another country that was ruled from Moscow and at the same time had to come to terms with its own troubled past. Berlin was the capital of Germany during the rule of one of the 20th century's other murderous totalitarian movements, the Nazis. After Germany's defeat in 1945, Berlin was split in half at the Brandenburg Gate. East Germany was never officially a Soviet state, but it took its orders from Moscow, and Berlin's bombed-out streets were an ideal setting for Stalin to express his architectural dreams. The Soviets did not scar Germany in quite the same way as they did my country, but the Nazis did. Some of their buildings have been preserved, but the symbols have been almost entirely erased. In East Berlin, the Air Ministry became the headquarters of the Soviet military and then the East German state. The swastikas were removed, but they were soon replaced with another form of iconography. For me, as a former Soviet subject, this seems like swapping one tyranny for another.
But this is not the prevailing view in Germany.
Hello, nice to meet you. Welcome to Berlin.
The Soviet occupation is viewed differently here.
I would say that in Germany we have that culture of respect. So we are still using even buildings from the Nazi time. So from an intellectual point of view, if you reach this point that you can divide the building, its construction and its design from the content and its political ideas, you can find a new function for the building, but you should somehow document its history.
I'm one of those people who feel angry at buildings. Do you think that young people here would agree with you?
You know, the youngest generation, for them, the wall is something which is an experience of the parents or the grandparents. So it's quite far away. They should be aware that the socialist time was a time of repressions, and today we might use those relicts from the Nazi time or from the socialist time to educate the young generation, to show them what kind of freedom they can live today.
Germany has shown that these painful memories of the past need to be acknowledged. The Holocaust Memorial sits in the heart of Berlin and leaves the visitor in no doubt as to what happened here. The generation responsible for the war have all but disappeared, but Germany still remembers the terrible price of unrestrained nationalism. I wonder if this is a lesson that can only be learned in defeat. Soviet Berlin's most symbolic structure was the wall, built in 1961 in response to mass defections from East Germany. When the wall fell, a section was preserved, and artists from East and West were commissioned to paint it.
Здравствуйте, Ирина. Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте. Приятно познакомиться.
Irina, a Moscow-based artist, was one of them.
Какая была идея этой картины, которую вы хотели показать здесь?
Ну, я хотела сказать, что вот пришло время, упала с неба комета, и теперь все мы будем жить дружно и замечательно, и не будет у нас холодной войны, поскольку это памятник был холодной войне. В общем, я была очень молодая и наивная тогда, поэтому думала, что именно так все и будет. Да.
Many Russians, like Irina, moved to Germany after 1989. There are no clear figures, but it is estimated that over 1 million became German citizens.
А то, что Советский Союз эту стену построил, как
это не Советский Союз построил, это ГДР построил. Просто Советский Союз отдал полномочия делать восточным немцам, что они считают нужным.
В Грузии мое поколение не очень хорошо оценивает то, что у нас все равно остаются эти мемориалы.
Я объясню почему. Это я как раз понимаю. Просто потому, что вам переписали учебники школьные, вот и все. Элементарно делается. То же самое на Украине.
Но потом они нас колонии сделали, да?
Какой колонии? Раз построили железную дорогу к вам, прямо к вам, огромную.
Взяли.
Какую свободу? Какая свобода? Свобода — это когда спишь вообще. Свободы нет как таковой, понимаете? Огромные деньги шли на поддержку экономики, на поддержку сельского хозяйства. Мандарины, чай покупали у вас, привозили в Россию, все продавалось. Свободу взяли, спрашивается, ваш Сталин, это же, пардон, грузин, он у нас был царем. Ну, он взял нашу свободу, получается, или как, русских. Пришел ваш царь грузинский, сел на наш престол.
Irina's attitude both to the wall and to the Soviet Union are, for me, those of a colonizer. The Soviet Union never stopped trying to sell itself as a union of equals, but it never was. Berlin is home to many hundreds of thousands of Russians. Every year, on the 9th of May, they come to Treptower Park in Berlin to celebrate Soviet Victory Day. After 2003, we stopped celebrating the 9th of May. And I'm very happy about it because it was not Georgia's war. It was a war that Georgia sacrificed a lot for. But we would not be in this war if we were not occupied by the Soviet Union. Overhearing their conversations and the things they're saying to their children is suggesting that for them, this is more than liberating Germans. They're making it seem like it's Russia's victory. This is for them an opportunity to express their imperialistic dreams. They are still dreaming about the time when Russia was so powerful that it could come all the way to Berlin. The most uncomfortable thing for me is to witness the bikers, known as the night wolves. They stand for everything I think should be condemned. The occupation in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, and the continued occupation of Georgia. And seeing them celebrating Victory Day was like they were promoting the imperial ideals of Russia. I feel that the victorious atmosphere that was there was distasteful.
For me, it's like dancing on the grave of an enemy you killed. It's really not necessary. And I'm really happy that the Georgian flag is not here. It's just Russian flags and Soviet flags.
How do we deal with the scars of our past? We cannot erase them. I accept that. But I don't think you should celebrate them either. Finding out about what really happened to my family has helped my grandpa, my parents, and me. But watching the Russian triumphalism here today makes me realize how unlikely it is that my country will ever be truly free. And without that freedom, it's hard for me to see how our scars can ever fade.